And of course, we saw that as events unfolded, there was only really going to be one winner, and more and more and more. It looked like Joshua was going to be up against it, and he was. And Usyk did it. He retained his heavyweight titles with a split decision win over Joshua in Saudi Arabia. But thereafter, all sorts of curious events started beginning, Simon. And he left the ring, Joshua left the ring, only to come back and then really started to verbally unload.
Tonight, maybe I could have done better, but it shows the levels of hard work he must have put in. So please give him a round of applause as our heavyweight champion of the world. Woo! I'm not a 12-round fighter. Look at me. I'm a new breed of heavyweights. All them heavyweights, Mike Tyson, Sonny Liston, Jack Dempsey. Oh yeah, you don't throw combinations like Rocky Marciano. Because I ain't 14 stone, that's why. I'm 18 stone, I'm heavy. It's hard work. This guy here is a phenomenal talent. We're gonna cheer for him 3 times. Well, how many belts you got now, bro? 5. Hip hip! Hip hip! Hip hip! Hip hip! Hip hip! And as I said, I was studying Ukraine and all the champions that have come from your amazing country, but I've never been there. But at the same time, what's happening there is, I don't know what's happening, but it's not nice at the end of the day. I've seen it with Lomachenko in his second fight against Orlando. There was unrest in Ukraine, right or wrong. There was issues in Ukraine in your second fight. There was civil war. Vitaly Klitschko, when he faced Danny Williams, civil unrest. Usyk as a champion, please raise your hand. Under them circumstances, he managed to become champion.
I mean, Usyk watched on. We all watched on, Simon. And we all watched wondering what we were watching.
Yep.
I mean, I was thinking, well, big words from Joshua, but what does it really mean? I mean, why did he do it? Have you now come to terms with the fact, A, that he did it, and B, maybe the reasons that he did it?
Well, I think first and foremost, you've got to commend him for taking this fight, because a lot of people might not have taken this fight. I think there's an element of bravery taking the fight, but I think also perhaps he was forced into it because his credibility had been so diminished. So you've got to put that out there. I also think going back...
for taking the fight. He took the fight because he thought he would win it.
He took the fight against a fighter that most people thought was going to lose against, and was beaten so badly in the first fight that a lot of people would have ducked this fight, had a build-up fight, got some more dough, and then gone back in at a later stage and maybe fought a different route.
He got schooled again.
He got schooled again. But
Usyk was never going to knock him out, was he?
But the point I'm making, well, Usyk nearly knocked him out in the first fight and had the ability to probably do it in this fight as well. I think it's a combination of exasperation meeting entitlement. And by that I mean he's exasperated and frustrated by the fact that he could not better this guy. And ultimately he has a sense of entitlement because he's been led to believe that somehow or another he's something that he's not. I keep hearing this narrative that Anthony Joshua rebuilt British boxing and that Anthony Joshua is responsible for the increase in British boxing. Well, I'm sorry, they put 90,000 fans in against Froch Groves before Anthony Joshua was ever doing stadium fights. So that's nonsense and diminishes other fighters. You then look at the scorecards and look at this fight and all of its nuances and peculiarities. That was not a split decision. That was a split decision because somehow it validates the next chapter of Anthony Joshua on DAZN, where someone can monetize him there because he was beaten convincingly by Usyk. Usyk was the better fighter. Then you go into the post-fight rants about what he's entitled to, how he views the world, and why he needs to handle a Ukraine flag and virtue signal on the back of that, and think to yourself, what's the purpose of this? Why do you need to do that? That's a sense of entitlement. And then you go to the fourth stage of the situation, which is the post-match conference, when the pound hound, Eddie Hearn, has got on his ear and gone, hang on a second, you've just killing this golden goose here. We need to see a bit of contrition. Let's see a little bit of pullback from this. So we see a very emotional Joshua, which I believe is contrived, and then we see a set of tweets.
You think that was contrived?
I believe there's embarrassment behind it, and I believe there's humiliation, but there's also a tacit awareness of the ridiculousness of the outburst. But here's the other side of the equation that we can't speak to, that Graeme can speak to and elite athletes can speak to. What is it like to be in such a situation where there's so much expectation? And by the way, when he talks about respect, he doesn't want respect, he wants fawning deference. If he wants to find out what his respect is, go down to his ATM and look at the 40 million quid that he earned from his fight. There's your respect, pal. Right? But the bottom line is that the challenge that these guys go through that puts them in a moment where they are lost and they lose perspective. It's like Graeme suggesting a football manager reacts in a certain way after losing a football match. I don't think there is a need to tear this guy to pieces because of a ridiculous outburst. But there is also to get some context on what Anthony Joshua is and isn't. Whilst, he sits in this country and makes observation about the discrimination of this country, while sitting with a broadcaster that goes, and they indoctrinate us every week about discrimination, whilst broadcasting from a country that arguably has some of the biggest discrimination in its society. There's so much hypocrisy surrounding this fight. Anthony Joshua now is at a crossroads because I don't see him fighting for a world title again for at least 2 years.
Well, we're talking about the Ukraine flag. We're talking about a bunch of things. And I think of you carrying a flag, the Galatasaray flag, and planting it in the centre circle at Fenerbahce. Is that a similar kind of moment?
Well, you
when
find,
like 24, 40 hours later, you're waking up and you think, oh, God, I've done it now.
Yeah, win and lose, when you feel you've been treated badly, you can react a certain way. When you've maybe won something, I mean, you're in a zone which is hard. You can't explain it because we're all different. I know where I am. I know what I was like when we won that flag incident. It's something that I shouldn't have done, but I felt it was the right thing to do at the time. I'd have to say that boxing is the hardest sport. I think it's the hardest sport. I
agree.
And if you think you're surrounded by your team and it's all positive, and you're going to win this, you're going to do that, you're so much better than them. He's come up against a guy who is as good as anyone in the heavyweight division that I've seen for, well, maybe ever, because he's a technician, a wonderful boxer, fighting a man who's a lot bigger than him, and he deserved to win the other night for me. And I'm no expert on boxing, but I just think his technique and his movement was just far superior. Far superior. But what he must regret, AJ will regret, and that's why he's come back into the ring. He was in the zone, whatever that was. He wasn't with us for that first few moments where he's thrown the belts out the ring and he's talked a lot of stuff he must regret today. He must regret. He's tried to retrieve it, and in many ways he just made it worse.
Well, he did try to retrieve it. And he was fighting back the tears when he tried to retrieve it in the press conference. And whether you think it's contrived or not, Simon, this was Joshua.
Am I proud of myself? It's really, really hard for me to say I'm proud of myself. I don't feel anything. I'm upset, really, like deep down in my heart. Man.
I mean, that's not contrived, is it? That's not contrived when you get spontaneous outbursts like that from the gathered media.
I do think there's an element of it being contrived. I do think there's an element of context that needs to be given to the fact that he's reflecting upon a question at the same time as reflecting upon his outburst, reflecting upon the disappointment, and also probably having Eddie Hearn in his ear going, what the hell are you doing? We've got much more money to be making together and much more lectures to give the British government about how wonderful it is over in Saudi Arabia, and all that cobblers we've had to listen to all week. Bottom line is Anthony Joshua came up short. He was beaten by the better fighter, and it's levels. And people have been building him up to a level. He's got into that bubble, believes the own hype, and he's every time he stepped up, he's gotten beaten. He's beaten fighters that are at the end of their boxing career. He won the title from a paper champion. He beat Vladimir Klitschko at the end of his career. He is a credit to himself. He's done fabulously well. But now we need to get some context. Tyson Fury is the best fighter generationally. He'll clean Usyk's clock, undoubtedly in my mind. I think he could beat Anthony Joshua and Usyk in the same afternoon. He's that good. But the bottom line is that to go after Joshua for the ridicule, he made a mistake. People make them all the time, and he needed to have thought about it more carefully, and he needed to think about his press conference more carefully afterwards. But the bottom line is he was a better fighter in this fight than he was in the first, but he just wasn't good enough.
Couldn't get
That's
there.
It's a simple fact in life.
After what we saw post-fight with Joshua, has he gained more respect from you, or has he lost more respect from you? What did you think when you watched it? And now the dust has settled a bit. What do you really think now? 03717 223344 810 89. And already, Simon, the messages coming in. Great show as always, guys. This is Jordan. I can see Fury beating Usyk and then calling out Joshua after that. And then everybody sits down at the end of all that. That might happen. Who knows? That might happen. But have you gained or have you lost more respect for Joshua after what you saw on Saturday night in Jeddah?
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.